hello, and thank you all once again for tuning into another live podcast episode of Outside the Box. It's been a little bit since I've done a show. I have so many projects going on, but I wanted to jump on here really quickly to discuss, which I think is a very, very important topic that kind of applies to everybody, and it is how to deal with dysfunctional family members. I will say dysfunctional people, and I'll go into later why I did not say that, but because I want to dive into the topic and bring out my guests. So before I do that, I just want to remind you all to please like, follow, share, subscribe, invite people to my page. Everything that I do is to inspire people and to help them navigate their walk with Christ or their Christian lifestyle. But if people don't watch the videos or don't know that they're there, then the message is not going to go much further than that. So please make sure you like, follow, and share to anybody who you think may be inspired or encouraged or need some of the topics that I discussed. Also, don't forget that you can watch my show on Roku via the Entertainment Theater. All you have to do is go on to Roku, look up Entertainment Theater app, download it. You will see my shows there. Daily, I have shows on there, and you can also see other shows, other podcast shows, and other independent creators also taking advantage of that platform. So, and I think that's it. Oh, and don't forget to tune into my show on Thursdays, which is About My Father's Business Thursday, where I highlight Christian businesses, services, and products. If you're interested in having your own spot on there to talk about your own service and you're a Christian and things like that, please reach out to me because I'm always looking for people to bring on and talk about, how God is working in their lives through their businesses. And again, today, the topic is how to deal with dysfunctional families. I think this is a really, really important topic because and when you're a Christian, it's almost unavoidable that you're going to have some kind of dysfunctional people in your family. And it's not always clear exactly how to deal with those people, especially from a Christian standpoint, when your flesh and your anger and stuff like that gets in the way. Especially when you have people that you're attached to that have an effect on your identity, your self-esteem, and stuff like that. Sometimes it'd be very difficult to know how to navigate those relationships. You have some people who go to the extreme and they don't want to tolerate anything and they condemn everything and they say that everybody is a devil. And then you have people who kind of put up with everything in the name of God and stuff like that. So I really want to kind of help people find some balance and some really practical tips and understanding about how to navigate those relationships, because again, they are a big part of our walk as Christians, is dealing with other people, whether it's your kids, your spouse, your family members, your friends. Just like God uses people to help us grow, the devil uses people too. So, but to go into this conversation today, I have two special guests. One has been on before, Aircinia Marshall. We did a show about blended families. And then my other guest is her first time on. She is a licensed, she told me what the P was, but I forgot. I think licensed professional counselor. Yeah. So we have some professional perspective on this topic as well. And I'll go ahead and bring the ladies out and you can learn about them a little bit more. And so thank you, ladies, so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Hello.
If you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves and talk a little bit more about who you are and what you do so people can have a really good idea, I'll really appreciate it. So, Natasha, since you're here for the first time, I'll go ahead and let you go first.
Hello, I am Natasha Montgomery. Thank you again for having me and this opportunity to discuss this important topic. I am a licensed professional counselor as well as a certified life coach. And I own my own private practice called MBS Whole Health, MBS standing for Mind, Body, and Spirit. So I do counseling from a Christian biblical perspective. So I think it'll be a great opportunity to kind of merge together spirituality as well as kind of some of the professional counseling aspects as well in this conversation.
Yeah, great. Absolutely. And I agree with that because a lot of times people try to, as Christians, they try to separate counseling from Christian. They think if you go to counseling, you're not Christian, and I've seen people really adamant about that. And that was actually a show topic that I wanted to do a while ago. I didn't get around to it. So I really like that you bring those two because I do think counseling is important and that Christians should not have a stigma about going to counseling and things like that. So anyway, but thank you so much for the introduction. And Aircinia, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Aircinia Marshall. I am a entrepreneur, pastoral life coach. I'm a mom. I'm a wife. We juggle a lot of things over in our camp, and we have a blended family. So our ministry is Cocoon to a Butterfly. Ministry where we literally just teach others how to be who God called them to be. One of our ministries that we funnel through Cocoon to a Butterfly is our Blended and Victorious. It's a tough job when it comes to blended families. So we teach others how to blend their family God's way, so we love doing that. We love just helping others to see themselves the way that God sees them. So.
Yeah, and I think, and I will post the show that we did about blended families because it's a little bit attached to this topic that we have today. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but a lot of times when you do have blended families, there's a little bit of dysfunction kind of sprinkled in there a little bit sometimes. So, but I'll post the show that we did about that underneath the comments if anybody's interested in checking that out. And so once again, thank you ladies for tuning in. Thank you for joining me today to talk about this topic. And so we'll just dive right in. So I will go first. And again, I want you ladies to both answer this question as well. Please feel free to reveal or admit whatever you want because it can be a delicate topic. So I'll go first with explaining my own experience with dysfunctional families. And I can tell you that I come from a pretty dysfunctional family. And I, didn't have the greatest childhood. There was a lot of abuse. There was divorce. There was fighting. I also grew up in the hood, which added another layer of dysfunction on top of that. Because when you grow up in environments where there's dysfunction everywhere, then you kind of think that dysfunction is normal. And then you kind of have to, I know a lot of my Christian walk has been God helping me to unlearn those things and to learn the right way to deal with people, see myself, relationships, because one of the main things about that is that it does affect your identity, especially if you're dealing with it as a kid growing up. And so that's a little bit about my experience with dysfunctional families. I have made it my aim as a mother myself of 5 to not repeat the patterns that I saw growing up. And then as we go through, I can probably explain a little bit more if anybody has specific questions about my experiences. I don't have any trouble answering them, but I would like to know what are you ladies' personal experience when it comes to dysfunctional families? I hear some noise. I'm not sure what that is. Do you ladies hear that?
Yeah.
Okay. Aircinia, you don't hear it?
What does it sound like?
Just background noise. Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, so if you ladies if you're not talking, if you can mute, I think that will help. But if you're talking, then you can unmute. I think that will help. So, where was I?
Okay. So Natasha has muted, so I'll go on and go, and then I'll mute out.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, you know that from when we spoke about blended families, we dealt with a little bit of, the dysfunction as well. But I will say that I think that many of us have dealt with dysfunction simply because things are handed down generationally. There are tons of things that are handed down generationally, and we think that it's okay. And we're taught, that family is family and you have to deal with family no matter what,
Yeah.
And even with me, that has led to, just depression and not having the know-how to set boundaries with family, because you're always taught that because as family you have to just deal with it. Oh, that's just how they are. And so as I got older, as I got into counseling, and as I started to walk with the Lord, it had to be a point where I had to make a decision where I had to say, you know what, I'm going to have to draw boundaries, because if I don't draw boundaries, it's affecting who God is calling me to be. Whether it's being a wife, a mom, counseling, all of that, it was affecting me in a negative way. So that's when I learned, like, okay, I am around dysfunction, grew up in dysfunction. I was dysfunctional at some point. And so
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
had to do what I needed to do, to make sure, because we all have a purpose. And if we got dysfunction and chaos going on, we do not have the capacity within us to be who God called us to be fully.
Yeah, yeah. And I would even say that dysfunction is a distraction from what you're called to be. And I think that's one of the enemy's purposes for, trying to, I guess, overwhelm you or surround you with dysfunction is to distract you from yourself, from God, who you're called to be, and everything. So I totally agree with that. Yolanda just jumped on here and said hello from Detroit. And I just wanted to acknowledge her and say thank you, Yolanda, for jumping on. And thanks for tuning in, and I hope you get something out of this. So, Natasha, if you want to go ahead and explain your own experience.
Yes, I definitely agree with Aircinia as far as the generational patterns, right? I think a lot of us, just from my own personal experience, growing up, a lot of kind of generational, we're taught to work. Like my parents, they worked a lot, they were always involved in church. So that was kind of the pattern, but knowing like that emotional piece is also very important. And I think as we become more aware of the importance of mental health and cultivating that emotional side, the attachment needs, kind of recognizing that some of those things were missing and recognizing, okay, how did I seek to get those attachment needs met growing up that weren't healthy? And like you said, going to counseling, being more aware of those things in order to break those patterns, and even being able to reconnect with their parents in a healthier way based on their increased understanding and knowledge. So I think generational patterns play a large play into that. Even thinking about the work that I had to do for myself. I grew up, mom, stepdad raised me, still was kind of that longing for my bio dad. And when he came into the picture, it was extremely dysfunctional. So I had to learn, okay, how do you remove yourself, even if it's something that you thought you wanted? Okay, this situation isn't healthy for me. And learning, okay, I saw what I needed to see, that unknown, seeking that thing, and then saying, okay, this isn't healthy. How do you cut that off? And know that you've tried the best that you can, but it isn't something that serves you.
Yeah, oh my goodness, you said so much in what you're saying. And it's always been my belief that when the Bible talks about generational curses, that generational curses are actually learned behavior passed down through generations. And you're kind of stuck in that pattern, and that's what God comes to kind of release us from those patterns, because if you don't have something else to kind of pull you out of that, you're almost bound to repeat it. And it kind of goes back to, I always talk about how the mind works. It goes back to the functioning of the brain. The brain functions on patterns. So it's very easy for us to pick up patterns and repeat them and not even fully understand that we're doing that, why we're doing that, and connect the problems that's coming from doing that. So it's not easy at all to really identify these things, especially when you have relationships with people like you talked about that you love, that you have some connection to, that you feel like you need. And then it requires some soul searching. And a lot of people have a hard time doing that because it's not easy to figure out, why am I acting this way? Why do I feel this way? Why am I responding this way? And things like that. So there's so much. I want to ask both of you ladies, since you both brought it up, do you think that this is, because I've heard this as well, this is family, you stick with family, you don't turn your back on family. Do you ladies think this is a generational thing from the Black community because of our history of slavery? I'm just kind of curious as to what you ladies both think about that.
I definitely agree as far as it being generational trauma that we pass down unknowingly, as far as just accepting things that happen. Think about going back to slavery, right? There was a lot of things that were happening within the family that you literally could not talk about or you would lose your life. So it's kind of ignoring those things and saying we appreciate the sense that we have family so much that we want to hold on to that no matter the circumstance. So that being carried down from generation to generation. So even if family, brother, mom, dad is toxic, hurtful, abusive in different ways, feeling like you have to maintain that connection no matter what. It is a generational trauma, generational curses that a lot of us hold on to until we reach that place of self-awareness that we can choose something different.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's like, first of all, you have slavery where parents were split apart from the kids. So once we get the kids back and once we get the family structure back, let's hold on to it. But then you have the Reconstruction, after the Reconstruction era, where it's like the whole world is against us. So at least let's try to have each other, even if it's because they have whatever bad way I'm treating you can be worse than what people are doing outside, to us as a community. And so I can definitely see that being even a subconscious pattern of thinking that kind of just grows into, like you said, this dysfunctional way of dealing with relationships. What do you think, Aircinia?
I absolutely agree because what I've often heard was that we don't speak about what goes on in the family and different things like that. And so it teaches us all to not accept accountability for our actions, but it also teaches the younger generation to just accept whatever, So we're kind of teaching them one thing and we're saying another thing. Don't let anyone run over you. Don't do this and don't do this. But yet we are allowing it within the family, all because we want to. It's most of the time about image, and looking a certain way, for society. And truth be told, everybody going through something,
Exactly.
And so we just train, our families to live by this code of, once family, always family. We got to stick through it. And there, it's true to some extent, but we have to know where to draw the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Natasha, did you want to say anything about what Aircinia said, or did you want to respond anyway? If not, we could just move on.
I think it goes back to that concept, right? We were always taught growing up, blood is thicker than water. Blood is thicker than water. No matter what, you have to stick with your family. But I think we have to think deeper into that, because if your trauma, if your stress, if abuse is coming from the family, like you said, Arsenia, how did they expect you to go out and develop healthy relationships? That the people closer to you, the closest people that you have that they say is thicker than water, you have to stick together, can treat you this way. How can you be expected to go out and create healthy relationships, which then creates another pattern because you now have a family and you're repeating these patterns?
Exactly. So now what are some of the ways, because I know for me, it's a process for you to actually get to the point where you're like, okay, this relationship is not healthy, especially if you grow up around it. Because again, like I mentioned earlier, when you grow up around something, you have this idea that is normal, and it takes a little bit of kind of self-reflecting and examination of your environment to say, okay, well, something is not right here. So what do you ladies think is the process that you went through to get to the point where you're like, okay, something needs to be done here? Like, I recognize that something with this relationship is not working.
Okay. I think for me, kind of my process, I really had to remove myself from my home environment. So I grew up inner city Detroit, in the hood. Is like you are your environment. And I moved away, went to college. And I think it exposed me to different things, as far as you don't really know what you're going through isn't necessarily normal until you're exposed to different things. So I think now we have a lot of people who have more exposure. We have more access to technology, the internet. We have more access to mental health care. So a lot of people are able to have that level of awareness to say, okay, something doesn't feel right. I don't think this was healthy. I didn't like how this is going. I can see myself starting to repeat some of those patterns. What are some steps that I need to take individually in order to stop this process from repeating? And what is some work that I need to do for myself to say, okay, I don't need to accept unhealthy behavior anymore. So it's kind of developing that self-awareness, developing boundaries to say, okay, these are things that I no longer want to deal with, which is hard, right? So you're doing all this self-work, you're doing all these things and trying to go back and say, okay, what does this mean for relationships that I have with my family? How does this look? If I'm the one doing the growing and improving, but they're still in that same environment, it takes some either maybe educating, right? Some conversations, some hard conversations, and establishing some really healthy boundaries.
Yeah. Aircinia, what do you have to add to that?
Absolutely, Natasha. Boundaries. I talk about boundaries all the time. I am the queen of setting boundaries. I will say that. I will set boundaries anytime, because I understood and began to pay attention to how things would affect me. And like I said, for me, family is your first ministry that you have. And so when I got married, that was something that I really, really asked the Lord to help me with, was being able to know how to properly minister to my family as a wife and as a mom. But it wasn't until I began counseling for Mercy Multiplied years ago that I began to really work on me. And the reason I say that is because we as counselors got a chance to sit in on the teachings, and we got a chance to do the praise and worship with the young women that came there for help. And so when we were at Mercy, the thing was, in order to help someone else, you needed to make sure that you were healthy as well. And so while I was there, I had an opportunity to be around ladies who were also helping the young women in the home, but we all had to keep each other accountable because we knew that we couldn't help someone if we were not healthy. And so that began my journey of really, really looking at me and seeing what was unhealthy and what was healthy, and starting that journey of, digging in and looking at me and saying, okay, that part about me isn't healthy, and what do I need to do? And even beyond that, as I began to work on me, having transparent conversations with family. And when you have those transparent conversations with family about what's going on with you, or how your interaction with them and how it affects you, whether it's negative or positive, you give them an opportunity to understand where you're coming from, and you try to work with them, to stay on a level of where it's healthy. But in the event that that does not happen, you do have to draw healthy boundaries with family. And I always say, pray and ask God what those boundaries look like, because the flesh will say, cut them off and leave them alone. But that's not healthy, because we want to make sure our heart stays pure, because we can't help someone if our heart isn't pure. And so that's been my goal, to work on me and being transparent enough and not hiding, because we were taught to just hide and not talk about stuff and act like it wasn't there. But once I'm transparent, if they're not able to handle my transparency, draw the boundaries, keep my heart pure, and keep praying for the individual and for the family that this doesn't continue in the generations moving forward.
Yeah. You said some things too. I want to kind of address them, but I want to kind of keep it in a pattern where people can kind of follow and actually get some tips and stuff from this. And so right now I want to focus on, how you identify that it's a dysfunctional relationship. But I think something that you said was very, very key, and I'm going to get to it in a minute. But I'll go ahead and answer the question for myself. And I tend to be a little bit more detailed, just how my brain works. And so for me, the people think, like, a lot of times when they say the death is mentioned a lot in the Bible. And so a lot of times we see death as just dying, just not being here. But death is anything that is not bringing the fruit of the Spirit into your life: positivity, love, encouragement, self-esteem, anything that's causing you to not grow or to stay in a certain spot, because that's what God does. He grows things. He's the creator of life. And so when you have those relationships in your life that are not contributing to your growth in a positive way, then that's when you know that something is not right. And so a lot of times people are not really able to identify those things right away. But if you have repeated bad habits that you're doing, you're depressed, you have an attitude, you're angry, it can even be something as simple as, you have an addiction to something. And so it could be shopping, it could be food, it could be a drug. And so all of these behaviors are usually indicators that there's some form of dysfunction going on. And it usually comes from the family. It's not always, but usually that's where it comes from. And so sometimes you have to take a deeper look at your behaviors and figure out why you're responding that way. Why are you never happy? Why are you always angry? Why do you do these things, as the Bible, as Paul said, I keep doing these things that I don't want to do. And so when you start to identify, again, it takes some self-searching, some soul searching. You identify, okay, where are these things coming from? And again, like I said, they usually come from relationships, and then you have to start kind of guarding yourself. Because another thing that the Bible also says is love others as you love yourself. And I think we really leave that as you love yourself part out a lot, because you have to be able to love yourself first before you can actually love other people. But we don't take the time to even know if we love ourselves, to nurture ourselves, to understand what loving yourself means. And so you can't, if you don't have that healthy self-esteem or the healthy love for yourself, it's going to be very difficult for you to maintain healthy relationships with other people, and even to draw boundaries, because drawing boundaries requires a level of self-esteem to be able to do that, especially when it comes to your family members. And so I just wanted to kind of pinpoint some of the ways that you can see that there might be something going on. A lot of times we know, deep down, we know that something's not right, but we make excuses for people. We don't want to let them go. We don't want to lose a relationship. And you can go through that process for as long as you want. You can do it for 2 months or 6 months or 5 years or 10 years. But at some point, you have to be honest with yourself and say, you know what, this thing that's been nagging me, I need to pay attention to it, because I know something is not right with this relationship. So that's what I wanted to add. Do you ladies have anything to add to what each other said or what I said? Both of you are muted.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I think you're absolutely right. And when you're saying that, kind of looking at that, one, self-love is so important. So really having an awareness of, one, who you are, right? So saying, okay, who am I as an individual, separate from kind of outside influences, separate of what my family thinks I am, but who am I as an individual? And how do I really view myself, to kind of understand, okay, what parts of me that were maybe put, like generational things that don't necessarily belong to me. I always tell my clients, it's like, be mindful when you make your negative coping tools personality traits.
Yes.
To cope with our experiences, and then we say it's just a part of our personality. But in becoming aware of who you are, you can recognize, okay, maybe I'm not just mad all the time. Maybe I'm not just mean, or maybe I'm not just an introvert, right? Say, oh, I don't like people. I don't like having friends. I don't really deal with my family, but really assessing, why are you like that? What is the source? What is really the root of that has led you to become this person? And in recognizing that, how can you shed some of these things to say, okay, this is who I truly am, and this is how I can accept myself for who I am. In doing that, I think, one, like you said, it helps it to be easier to identify where to create boundaries. But also, I think it helps you to have a sense of understanding that other people around you need to go through that process as well.
Absolutely.
Help you to be able to reach back and be more understanding, more accepting, having those conversations to understand, well, what is your story? What makes you do these things? Why do you think you took that approach as a parent? Or why do you think you behave that way as my sibling? It helps to start those conversations and makes you aware of who you're creating to be a villain in your story.
Yeah.
And challenging you to understand their story and say, okay, how do we work together to improve this relationship?
Yeah. I think that's a good point, because it's very easy. Like I talked about people who are angry. It's very easy to just blame somebody. Like that's a very, very easy thing to do. That was the first thing Adam did as soon as after he it's like, it's her fault. So it's very easy for us. It's very easy for us to just blame and want to put the blame somewhere, but that actually doesn't solve anything.
Right.
And when people do it, people can actually have done something very, very wrong to you, but blaming them is not a solution. It's better, and I like that you said that, to try to understand, because we're all just people kind of responding from our environments, learning from our environments and things like that. And when you can kind of understand how somebody got like that, a lot of times, and I say this all the time, the way people treat you is more about them than it is about you. And a lot of times we take people's behavior personally when we don't realize it's a byproduct of whatever they are struggling with, and probably were struggling with way before they even met you. And even if they don't want to be like that, if they don't address what's deeper going on inside of them, it's going to come out. That's just how God created us. And so it's really important to try to understand where somebody else's experience is coming from, especially when it comes to parents, because it's very easy to say, oh, you did this, you did that. But at one point, your parent was a kid too. At one point, your parent was a vulnerable child too. At one point, your parent got taught some negative things too, and it just kind of spilled over into their parenting. And when you can do that, that provides healing as opposed to just blaming somebody, because you can blame somebody and then still be mad for the rest of your life and pointing the finger at them. Nobody gets anywhere. So that's a very, very good point. Aircinia, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Absolutely. Just in sharing what Natasha shared about, understanding, where the other person, has been and what they've, gone through. But I'm also a firm believer in, making sure that how you handle things, you handle it properly and you handle it in alignment with God, because a lot of times when you are setting up new behaviors, healthy behaviors, people only learn through what we show them, and so I can remember even during our blending process, my husband would always say, just continue to do what you're doing. Eventually, whoever needs to see what needs to be seen will see it, and that's what we have to also realize, just making sure that we walk out that journey of healing, and be an example, because a lot of times, we're also, because of that hidden notion of don't say what you're going through, but when you're transparent and when you're able to have, the ability to share openly what you dealt with, it gives a person an opportunity to say, well, man, I didn't know, you went through that too, and that's how you handle it. But another area I want to say is having accountability. When you have someone that's accountable, just as you are, I rely on the word of God, often, one of the things with, just coming in and changing and creating newness in an area that was dead, that was old, that was was not producing life. I use Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to the patterns of this world. And so when I do that, that means that I need to have somebody accountable and understands what that scripture means to be around me, to where if I fall off, they'll say, what are you doing? And so even though you may be around dysfunction in your family, you have to have someone that's connected to you that will hold you accountable, because this type of stuff that we've been dealing with for years, it's ingrained in us, and you have to do the work to get it out of you. And so you got to have someone that will tug your shirt and be like, no, you just did this, because sometimes it's habitual. You don't even know you're doing some of the stuff, And so you have to be open enough to be held accountable and have someone that's bold enough to call you out. You can't have some yes people around you. You got to have people that are bold enough to call you out in love, and you accept that they're saying, hey, that's not right. Let's see, why you're doing this. And, let's come up with healthier ways to deal with whatever it is that you may be dealing with, and so just to be specific, I'll say growing up, I kind of saw a struggle in marriages. I did not see healthy marriages. So guess what? I asked the Lord before I got married, I said, Lord, teach me how to be a wife. Teach me how to love my husband, and teach me how to stay married, and put me around others that have healthy marriages. You just have to do that, and you just have to be transparent enough to say what is going on in your family. You have to be transparent. That's the only way that generational patterns are broken, and that's the only way that you can change is if you're transparent with what you've been raised up around, has been handed down.
Yeah, I mean, so much that you said is just resonates with me. My brain is just churning here from the conversation in general. But I wanted to point out that a lot of these things, it's a lot of mental health things are in the Bible. And it's like sometimes people, they look at the Bible and they see, especially the Old Testament, which is a hot mess, but the killing and all that, and they miss the deeper lessons that are in there, because a lot of these things God is telling you, you know, how to operate. And so one of the things in the Bible is like bringing things to the light, because when something is hidden, it can't be dealt with. And again, it goes back to the way our brains are wired. Is wired on repetition. But another thing is awareness. Like all the marketing that you see, I don't care if it's politics, cigarettes, or whatever, is aimed towards grabbing your attention. Because once okay, I was frozen. Was you guys frozen? Okay, I'm back. Okay. So once something has your attention, it can dictate your behavior. And so if you're not aware, if you don't acknowledge what is in the dark and bring it to the light so that it can have your attention, you can't work on it. It's just going to continue to keep operating there in the dark, and you're going to be unaware of what's going on and just responding to what's going on in the dark as opposed to actually dealing with it. And so I kind of like that you mentioned that, because that's what goes to accountability. So sometimes people have trouble accepting that people that they love are dysfunctional, have brought kind of negative stuff into their lives. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of times they don't want to accept it. I know for me, a part of my dysfunction had to do with my parental relationships. And a part of me just did not want to admit that my parents were not who I thought they were, if I want to just simplify it. And it was a struggle, because it was like, if I thought that they were different from what I saw them, then what did that say about me? And it was just questions I didn't have the answer to. I didn't know. I didn't want it. Like, it was very overwhelming. But you have to be able to deal with it for yourself. And then, like you say, have those conversations with other people, because that accountability is not just for you. It's for those other people as well, because you present them an opportunity to now bring something to their awareness so they can deal with it. It's always a choice that we have to make to do these things, but we just have to do our part. And like what I feel both of you ladies are saying is that when you have people who are not willing to do their part of bringing it to their awareness and kind of working on it, then that's when you might have to draw some boundaries until they're ready. Sometimes they may not be ready at that time, but something you said may plant a seed and they might be ready later. So you never know. And you do have to leave your heart open for the opportunity should it come about. So great. I really love that. So Natasha, did you have anything you want to add, or that you were thinking about what was being said? Crystal Harris just jumped on here, and she's liking the conversation. She said true, and then she also said that's good. Thank you so much, Crystal, for watching. I appreciate your time. But Natasha, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think both of you guys hit on some really great points. My brain is just like so many words. I think what's kind of piggybacking on both of you guys is kind of when it goes back to, like you said, planting those seeds of having those conversations. And when you say, just recognizing one, your family, they're human, right?
Yeah.
We put, especially our parents, we put them on such a pedestal where we expect for them to be perfect and have all the answers and have it all together. But they're human people just like us. And they make mistakes. And like going back to what you said, they were kids at one point too. And they had their own experiences that they're still possibly trying to understand and trying to heal from. And my mom is on. I love my mom so much, but I want to kind of be transparent. I struggle kind of internally with this sense of like, I am not lovable. And it was because kind of that affection piece was a struggle for my mom. And me kind of going through my own healing process and starting to have conversations with my mom and learning about her own upbringing and where that comes from. It's like, okay, we have so much a better understanding for each other, better communication with each other. And I'm like, Mom, she calls me all the time. I call her. We're just sitting on the phone for no reason. I love you. So going back, doing that self-work, right? Having those conversations and allowing your parent to show you that they're human.
Yeah, absolutely.
The best they can with the tools they have available.
Yeah.
And you creating that environment to have open dialogue, to have saying, okay, Let's put it all out there. Let's be honest with each other. And it's not from a place of judgment. It's not from a place, I hate you, I'm angry, you broke me, you ruined me. But let's really get an understanding of who you are as a person. And
Yeah.
really working to meet on those common grounds and say, okay, how do we heal together? What does this look like? What do we want our relationship to look like going forward? But it's a lot of being honest, right? Putting your pride to the side and saying, okay, this is not, I'm going to rain down on you. Everything that you ever did to hurt me, I'm going to try to hurt you back. It's like,
Yeah.
if you really want to heal some of that dysfunction, putting your pride to the side, having those open dialogues, being understanding, showing love, showing forgiveness, showing grace in order to get that relationship to a better place.
Yeah, I totally agree with that because even my own dysfunctional relationships with my parents, you really have to get to a point where, like you say, you start to see them as people and you forgive them and allow them to just be people. Like it really boils down to God created us with needs, and everybody has them, regardless of skin tone, where you live, what country. We all have needs, and when those needs don't get fulfilled, a lot of the time, especially in our fallen condition, we conclude negative things about ourselves when those needs are not fulfilled. But really, those needs were meant to be fulfilled by God. And I say God because if we were all in alignment the way we were supposed to be, parents, those things they wouldn't know what you need without even realizing that they're doing something that fulfills a need in you. And I don't want to go into that because it's a long drawn out thing. But my point is that we have to understand that when the people that we love the most don't fulfill those core needs that we have, we can always go back to God to get those things met. We don't have to necessarily stay angry with that person or in a stalemate with that person because our needs are not being met. God's the source. He's always been the source for those things. And it's great when you have parents that can fulfill their purpose in bringing those things to fruition in your life. But when you don't, you can always go back to God. So you're not left empty handed. So that's one thing that I wanted to point out. Another thing is, like we were talking about, recognizing if you have dysfunction going on and doing some soul searching. Again, how do you know yourself when you grew up around a bunch of dysfunction all the time, especially your parents gave you a false sense of who you are? How do you figure out who you are? Again, we got to go back to God because He is the one who created all of us. He knows all of us. He knows us better than we know ourselves. So when you can't get that sense of identity and who you are again from other people around you, you can always go back to the source. I guarantee you He knows you better than your mother, father, sister, brother, and everybody else combined. So, but one thing that I wanted to kind of pivot to, you ladies, is like drawing boundaries, because I think that's a really, really important piece. And Aircinia, you said before, like, not to cut them off. I will admit that I have cut a few people off. So you're muted, Aircinia. You're muted.
Hold on. Let me clarify that. There are some you do not cut off, and then there are some that you do cut off. No, there are some that you must cut off because of pride and because there are some people that just feel like this is how I am and I'm gonna be how I am. You know what I'm saying? And so when it gets to that point, you have to bow out gracefully and with love.
Yeah.
So there are times when you do have to disconnect. Yes.
Okay, so somebody asked a question here really quickly, and I want you ladies to try to see if you want to answer it. Victoria said, why is dysfunction such a huge issue, especially within our community and within the younger generations? We kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but if any of you ladies want to kind of expound on her question and give her a little bit more insight, go ahead.
Natasha, you want to do
it? I think going back to what we were talking about before, so some of those generational things that pass down, but I think a lot too is that when you talk about the younger generation specifically, when we think about, we were just talking about how we internalize some of those in dysfunction, and we call it was like those negative, we consider negative things about ourselves, which can then turn into anger because it's like, okay, my parents, my whoever made me feel this way about myself, and I don't like that. So it's hard to heal those things unless that person is at a place where they're truly willing to take a look at themselves. Like you said, going back to the source, understand, okay, who did God say that I am? Really getting clear on that in order to be able to be at a place to heal those relationships. So sometimes some people are just at a stuck point and they're not at a place where they're yet ready to do that soul searching. They're not yet ready to let go of some of those hurts or pains or anger. And that's kind of giving them that process to say, okay. And I say, it's like, I think boundaries go both ways, right? So we set boundaries in a healthy way, but also we have to respect other people's boundary that they're not ready yet.
Exactly. Oh, I love that you said that. Yeah, absolutely.
Enforce my expectations on you that you're not yet ready to meet. So when you are ready and in a place where you're ready to heal yourself, then we can revisit healing this relationship. But it's hard if they're not even at the place to say, okay, how do they heal them first and then get the space to heal that relationship? I think it's a lot of time, being patient and taking, okay, you know what, I'm going to give you your space. And when you're ready, I will leave that door open for you, but it's not a revolving door. You can't come back in whatever you want and say, okay, when you're truly ready, that door will be open for you to walk through.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Aircinia, you want to take a jab at the question? Do you need me to read it again?
No. Okay. I want to talk from the perspective of the younger generation. Mm-hmm. You know, we're living in a time where there are some, you know, parents that have mindsets that, you know, I'm the parent and I'm right, you know, and that is a huge problem for our younger generation. You know, they see things that are wrong. They see things that's dysfunctional. And so what tends to happen is they begin to carve out their own path and they go on their own way because they realize, look, wait a minute, you're not even being honest. Or look, you were wrong. Or, you know, you didn't even apologize, but you want me to apologize. Or you want, you know, me to do particular things. You'll only tell me what to do, what's right, but you won't do what's right, you know. So I think we even have those dynamics of dysfunction going on. And the youth are just like, they just turn, you know, they just turn their ear off to, you know, the oldest generation and stuff. And we have to be transparent enough. There were things that I will share that there were things that that I have gone back to my children and addressed. And, you know, and ask questions. I even asked my children, like, is there something that you feel like I need to change as a mom? Like, you got to be transparent enough to ask that type of stuff. But for some parents, you know, they may feel like, well, I don't have to do that. You know, I'm the parent, you're the child. But if you want healthier relationships between, you know, parent and child, those are things that you need to do. Those are conversations that you have to have, you know, and also apologize if you're wrong and you're a parent.
Yeah.
Because how does a child learn how to be a healthy parent? By us being healthy parents,
you know? Exactly.
And so, you know, so I really feel that the younger generation, they're struggling with that, you know, currently, you know, they're struggling with, you know, do as I say and not as I do, you know, where we need to be saying, you know, do as I say and do. So our actions must be in alignment, you know, with what's right and be in alignment with God. You know, we're telling them, oh, you know, God doesn't like this, God doesn't like that. But at the same time, are our actions showing that we are living by God, you know, by God's standards? So, you know, I think that this younger, you know, generation, they're just struggling because of what they've seen in all areas. Even, I mean, it's so many areas that we could talk about, but
oh yeah, absolutely.
So I'm just gonna stay in the area of family, you know, but they struggle with what they've seen, and they know the history behind family, and no one wants to be transparent. Like, tell the truth. Tell them that you went through whatever, you know. I share with my, and this is something in depth, you know. I share with one of my sons how the spirit of adultery and stuff was in our family. right? That's dysfunction. Why? Because it come and tear up the family unit.
Right.
And I share with my child that it was in our family of generations, but at the same time no one talked to me about it. And at the age of 18, that spirit came for me. You understand what I'm saying? So we have to be transparent about the things that are in our family, the dysfunction. And it's so many things, they did just gets handed down, and it's like, don't say anything. Don't say anything. That's just the past. The past come for the current generation.
Yeah, absolutely. So somebody here, it just says Facebook user. And I just wanted to include his comment. It's a pretty long comment. I tried to put it on the screen, but it covered up like half of the screen, so I had to take it down. But it says he or she says the war on drugs played a large part of the breaking down of families. The children of that generation grew up with parents who were either in prison or hooked on drugs. Those children grew up without parents and are now the parents of the current generation. And the person also said this is a large contributor to the dysfunction, which I'm, this is Teray. I know who this is. This is my brother. Anyway, so yeah, and we kind of talked a little bit about, how the effects of the Black community, how things have been passed down. We didn't even get into the drug thing. We talked about slavery and we talked about civil rights era. But of course, there's a lot of things that play into the dysfunction in the Black community within families. But I want to emphasize that it's not just Black people. So I don't want to make it seem like Black people just have this dysfunctional, messed up stuff, because anytime all of us are living outside of the way God designed us to be, there is some type of dysfunction going on, and people are dealing with it in different ways. I think for Black community, it's a little bit more obvious because the breakdown of the family is so apparent. I mean, especially the consequences of it, because we're seeing it more so now, more and more but even now it comes from years of this stuff happening. And now we're starting to see the fruit of just a really big breakdown of the family. A lot of single parent homes, kids need their parents there as much as possible. Of course, a lot of stuff doesn't work out sometimes, but the rate at which we have single parent homes is definitely causing a lot of problems. So thank you for bringing that up, Teray, and thank you for watching. I appreciate you tuning in. And so, again, we talked about that a little bit more, but I wanted to go back to something that you said, Natasha, about drawing boundaries. And because when you tolerate dysfunction, so you were saying, like, when you have a relationship with people and you try to draw boundaries, and sometimes you might have to wait until that person is ready, which is awesome. I really love that you said that, because the Bible talks about love does not demand its own way. And a lot of times, even in marriages and all the relationships, you have people trying to impose upon other people, this is what I want, this is what I want you doing. If you don't do it, we're going to have a problem. That is not love. Right. You have to understand that people are human beings like you. They need time to process. They need time to learn. And you have to give them giving them the space and time to do that. That's what love is. You say, hey, I would like to have you in my life. I would like to have a better relationship, but I can give you the time and space to deal with you so that we can get there, instead of just demanding that they do something. So I really like that you mentioned that. But one thing that I wanted to add to that is that when you tolerate the dysfunction, when you say, I love you so much, I want you around, I know you are struggling with something, I'll just deal with it until you get there, you're actually creating that cycle of repeating the behavior, because you're not holding that person accountable, which means it's not in the forefront of their mind because they're not being held accountable for it. And they're just going to subconsciously keep repeating the behavior. But by you actually saying, look, I have to draw these boundaries, you're actually helping them. You're helping them to understand the cost of continuing that behavior and bringing it to the forefront of their mind and acting and creating the opportunity for them to ask themselves, is this really worth this relationship? And it causes them to do some soul searching. So drawing boundaries and not tolerating behavior is very, very important. And I always say that people who tolerate dysfunctional behavior is because they're also dysfunctional people. So you have to deal with yourself first. So while that person is off dealing with their issue, you need to deal with your issue so that when you guys come back together, it could be a more functional relationship, a relationship that's actually growing and not just circling around in the same dirty pond, so to speak. But another thing I wanted to add is that leaving your heart open for that reconciliation, because we talked about cutting people off, which I have done, and I'm glad Aircinia let me know that it is necessary sometimes. Because I will be honest with you, sometimes it's like, did I really do the right thing? Because you feel bad, you feel guilty, you love people, you want to be around them, and sometimes you question if that's really the right thing. And so, but then of course, when you examine the situation, you kind of arrive at the same conclusion, or you say, let me go around the person again and say, oh, okay, now I see why I had to cut you off, because I can't deal with this for my own self. It's not to hurt the other person, but you, again, loving yourself first requires you to take care of yourself and your mental health, and not really allow people in your life that kind of pulls you away from that. So I wanted to say that too. I was going to say something else, but I lost my train of thought. But if you ladies have anything to say about the stuff that I just said about, drawing boundaries, accountability, things like that, or even what each other said before I said that.
I will say, just with drawing boundaries, when we draw the boundaries, we must also be consistent with our boundaries, because if we're drawing boundaries on Monday, Tuesday, we just throw the boundaries out the window, it's not giving off consistency, So then that person is now like, well, you were okay with it on Monday. Now you're saying you're not okay with it on Tuesday, and then you want to put the boundaries back in place, So even consistency keeps both parties accountable too, It keeps and then it says, this is how I am, and there's no back and forth, because, when you're dealing with people and they don't even know if you're consistent in what you're trying to apply in your life, that's a problem, So we want to be consistent when we draw boundaries, but also I've always said it, just go with God with what those boundaries look like, and just continue to be in prayer concerning, those boundaries, because again, we all learn by how we become examples to certain situations. And if our families have never seen healthiness in certain areas, but we're healthy in it, then there are, times where we do need to cut ourselves off, but then there's also a time where we must allow ourselves to be the example of what healthiness looks like.
Yeah, I agree with that. So that's what I was going to say earlier, which I lost my train of thought, is that because I got a lot of comments coming here. I thank everybody for tuning in, watching the show. I'm getting a lot of great comments here and a lot of engagement, so thank you so much. But what I was saying is that about keeping your heart open, because it's very easy to just stay in your cocoon of course, being upset and stuff like that. And I think that's the biggest difference when it comes to, especially being a Christian, how you should deal with it. You should always be open for reconciliation. Always. You should never get to a point where it's like, I'm done with the person, live or die. I don't ever want to see you again. To me, that's not love, because the Bible said, love endures. And so, you might have to draw some boundaries, but whenever that person is ready. I mean, we even see an example in the Bible when I believe it was the Corinthian church, where people were kind of cutting up, and Paul and them was like, basically they have to leave the church. But when they want to come back, take your brother in, show him love so he doesn't get discouraged and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a very big key. And especially being a Christian, is always being open to reconciliation and dealing with whatever it is inside of you that's making you not be open to reconciliation if it comes about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I did want to address what you said about the youth, because I do think it's important, and we got to wrap up here soon, and we kind of getting into some heavy stuff. But I think that's really important, because you do have a lot of people, even with people coming to be the religion of Christianity. I don't really consider religion, but anyway, they see a lot of hypocrites, people saying one thing, and then people say, I don't want to have anything else to do with Christianity. These people are terrible. They say one thing, they don't, And so I've known a lot of people leave the church and never go back, even Christians who have sworn to never step foot back in the church because of the experiences and things that they've seen from other Christians. And so how much more younger people who are vulnerable and kind of need you a little bit more and need your guidance, for them to see you saying one thing and doing something else and expecting respect but not giving respect. I mean, it does create a huge contradiction in their understanding of life and relationships, to where you kind of leaving them vulnerable to other influences and not to trust what you're saying when you do that. So I did want to address that. Natasha, did you have anything to add about the whole youth aspect? Because I do think that's a really big thing now, especially with social media, because they're growing up in a totally different world than we were. So what are your thoughts on that?
I definitely agree. And it's even kind of speak to the name of your podcast. I think it's time for people, especially, and I'm very passionate about merging spirituality and mental health. It's like we got to take kind of that in the box thinking when it comes to spirituality and religion and say, okay, how do we become more transparent and more relatable? Because I think the youth, they can see through all of that. They're like, okay, you're not being honest. You're not telling the truth. And they're still seeking that connection. They still need it. But because they can't find something in an authentic, transparent, realistic way, they're not going towards religion. They're not going towards God. So I think kind of us, people kind of, those who are in position of power, ministers, pastors, as Christians in the church, really being authentic and transparent about our story. Because this walk with God is not easy.
It's not.
We're not like picking roses along the way. It is a process. And we all have our journeys, our struggles, our falls. So I think we have to be honest about that to create an environment that even seems useful for you. Because I think they're searching. I think a lot of times, even going back into kind of the war on drugs and breaking up with the family, a lot of us have gone to our peers for support, our peers for knowledge and understanding. So for us, as far as being older, saying, okay, how do we reach back? How do we create a space to meet people where they are in order to draw that connection? And that comes from a lot of honesty, and it comes from honesty with yourself. It's like, okay, you're not perfect. You have a story, you have a history, and not just keeping that for yourself, but using your experiences to help somebody else.
Yeah, and I think that was the thing about Christ that was just so engaging. I mean, he was just, so truthful, so transparent, so honest. He wasn't even nice all the time, but that truth and that genuine love, it draws everybody. It will draw most people, because some people can't be drawn. But I think that's very, very important. Someone asked a question here and said, what about opening up but scared of getting hurt again? I think that's a really good thing to address, because that is a very real thing that you struggle with when you're trying to draw boundaries and reestablish relationships and things like that. So what do you ladies have to offer for that question? And the question, I'll read again really quickly, is what about opening up but scared of getting hurt again?
Yeah, my approach, I think, is kind of, if you set a boundary, especially if you've decided to end that relationship for a period of time, my approach is, if you are opening, or if that person is circling back around, not to just get back to the day of day and just say, okay, we're going to see how this goes, but starting that off with a conversation. Like, okay, this is why we were separated for this period of time. These were the boundaries that we put in place. What are some things that we can do to work together to improve this relationship going forward? So it's not just jumping back in and seeing, because it does leave you exposed. It leaves you vulnerable to additional hurt, additional potential trauma. So it's saying, okay, how do we come together, address the things that has happened, and create a plan on how to move forward in a healthy way?
Yeah. And I would even add that you really need to pray and ask God as well, because you may not be ready for that. Like, you may, because a lot of times our desires kind of blind, and I don't say a lot of times, all the time, our desires blind up of stuff. And so if it's somebody that you really want a relationship with and they're coming back around, it could be a husband, a parent, or somebody, any other type of family member that you have a real deep connection with, your tendency might be to just brush it under the rug because they're making an effort and now you want. But you need to really ask God if you're ready, because sometimes you're not ready. You haven't healed yet. And to know if you're, because it's not going to be smooth sailing. And that's just with relationships in general. And so if you're not ready for those ups and downs that are going to come when you and two people are growing together, you have to make sure you're strong enough to handle that too, and not now all of a sudden you thought you were over the past and the person did something and boom, there's a trigger, and now all the past is back, haunting you and messing with you and stuff like that. So I agree with that as well. Aircinia, did you have anything you want to add to that
Absolutely.
question about? Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely, to what both of you guys shared, and I'll use something, about me. I went through something about 2 years ago that really, literally shook my world as it pertained to relationships. And even when the Lord brought someone into my life to help me get through what I had gone through, um, because I had not fully healed, I could not fully see that person as someone that was trying to help me. So what happened was I started, like, in a sense, sabotaging what God has sent to me.
Oh, wow.
And so that happens when we're not healed. We can't recognize what God has sent, to help us when we're not healed. And so it took some time for me to, I had to pull back. And I had to go deep diving with God, again, like, okay, Lord, there's still some stuff in here. It's still, when this happened, this made me feel this way. Or when this happened, it looked like what happened to me before. I literally had to talk to God about the things that was going on in the present, because he literally sent that individual to help me, to get me back on track, because I pulled back. I stopped doing ministry. I stopped helping people. And these are things that I love to do, because it's like, wait a minute, my relationships are crumbling. I started doubting who I was. I started worrying about how people viewed me, all this type stuff. And it just, it stifled me. It hindered me. And so I had to take the time to go back in the secret place with God, because I was not healed. I was not healed. I was not ready to be connected with individuals because everything looked the same. But it was only because I still had wounds that were not fully healed.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. I can't tell you how many times I thought I was healed of something, and then later come back. I'm like, it's more. Okay, now finally it's done. Oh, you get that feeling of the weight is lifted off of you. Okay. And then a few months later, there's more.
Yes.
And so you really have to allow, it's like peeling an onion. I don't think it's a better example that you can use, because that, especially when it comes from family, the root of that can be very, very deep. And God has to take it off of you in layers, because if he did try to take it off all at one time, you probably wouldn't survive it anyway. You probably would go insane. So he has to take it off of you in layers and layers and layers until you're actually able to get to the root. And the way that you know that, and I'm really glad that you mentioned this, Aircinia, is that how do you respond when you're in similar situations that look and feel? If you're still responding in a dysfunctional way, then you're not healed. But when you can be in that situation, and even if it is the same, like you said, you were thinking it was the same, maybe it wasn't. Sometimes it might be the same, but but you respond like, I'm okay. It's not triggering anything. It's not bothering me. Then that's when you know you're healed. But that does not mean now you don't draw boundaries. So, but yeah, so very, very good point. We do need to wrap up here. I feel like we can go on and on with this conversation. And so much stuff in my mind that we haven't even gotten to. And I feel like I'm kind of doing a conversation disservice. Maybe we can come back and do a part 2 of this, because I do think it's important. But is there anything you ladies kind of want to add before we wrap up here?
I'll just say, don't think that dysfunction is a way of life. God is not a God of chaos and disorder, and we are his children. Therefore, we have the capacity to have a life that is void of chaos. We have the ability to speak it out of our mouth and declare that we'll have order in our life, And so I just encourage, everyone, us all, to really, really, pay attention to what's dysfunctional in life and aggressively attack it. Put it before the Lord. Get in there and find out how are we partaking in the dysfunction. Get in prayer and come up with a plan of action of how to deal with it. But draw those boundaries and be okay with drawing boundaries. Now, that's all I have to share.
Amen. I second that. Natasha?
I think kind of takeaway is time is not the healing, right? Doing the work is the healing. So not saying, okay, oh, over time I'll just get over this, or over time I can just let this go. But it's really doing the work to create change. So saying, okay, I always tell when I'm working with my clients, especially doing attachment work, what are some similarities that you see in yourself, in your family dynamics that existed in your childhood? And especially some that were discomforting, traumatizing, you didn't like, because that will pinpoint you to areas that you need to do your own self-work, your own healing. And then once you kind of focus and do that, then you will be ready to kind of reach back and say, okay, how do I repair these relationships? How can I shift the dynamic of what this looks like going backwards, but also going forward, right? Are you creating these patterns in your relationships with your children and say, okay, how do I check myself and say, okay, I need to do some work to repair this going forward as well. That's the only way to start breaking these generational patterns and creating healthier patterns for future generations. So it's a lot of work. It's not easy to break these cycles, but it is worth it when you start to see those changes in your family dynamics, starting to see changes in your family relationship, because that trickles out, right? If we're all doing work within our family, it shifts the dynamic of our community as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points. Oh, I love this. And so I will wrap up by saying, which I think is a very key thing in this whole process, is not to be afraid, because sometimes people are afraid to deal with their issues. Sometimes people are afraid to lose people. I've seen people that's like, I can't live without this person. If I can't have this person in my life, I don't know how to function. Nobody should be that important to you that you can't function without them being in your life. I understand the attachment, but that's a dysfunctional attachment to another person. And the way that you deal with that, once again, you got to go back to God, because he will show you that I don't care if everybody else is gone, you still have him. And as long as you have him, you're okay. It doesn't mean you don't need other people, but it's not the end of the world if you lose some certain people. And God will always direct you, if you pray and you follow his leading, on the best path to reconciling those relationships. Because something that you said, Natasha, about doing the work, it is work. And sometimes you have people who are Christians that are so spiritual that they don't apply the practical things that need to be done, because this is what the Holy Spirit does. The Bible says the Holy Spirit will guide and teach you. That comes from practical tips, what you need to do. So it's not about this mysterious thing where, like you say, you just sit back and let time and you don't do anything. We have to do the work, and we have to let the Holy Spirit guide us on the work when it comes to ourselves and when it comes to dealing with other people. These are very, very key parts of our lives, that God created relationships. We didn't create relationships. God created these things, and he did so for a purpose. So don't let fear get in the way of you doing that. Fear is usually just an illusion that the enemy puts before your face to just try to stop you from doing stuff. And so you have to push past that fear. Don't be afraid to look deeper within yourself. Don't be afraid to hold people accountable, things like that. So be mindful of the fear. So that's my overall point. So thank you, ladies, so much for, doing this today. I really appreciate it. It has helped me as well. And I really want to try to do a part 2, because I feel like we didn't even get to like a lot of important stuff that I think needs to be said. But if anybody wants to know more about Natasha, if you want to just take a few minutes and let people know about your practice, where they can find out more about you and things like that, I really appreciate it.
Yes, again, I own NBS Whole Health, the private practice. I am licensed in the state of Texas. I provide virtual counseling. So if you're not necessarily in the DFW area, my website is nbswholehealth.com. Again, NBS is for mind, body, spirit. And you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at NBS Whole Health.
And the link for her website is also above this post. It should be above or below this post, depending on what platform you're on. So if you're looking for that, you can find it there. Aircinia, can you let people know where they can find you? And you're an entrepreneur. You can let them know about your business. It doesn't necessarily have to be related to the topic that we discussed today.
Okay. Well, I've already mentioned Cocoon to a Butterfly Ministry. We're on Facebook, and that's where I hop on and just kind of share, various topics that God leads me to share. Just like day before yesterday, I covered intercessors, because intercessors need covering as well. But we also have Anointed Creations, which is my t-shirt apparel and embroidery business that I have where we do Christian apparel. We also have a food trailer called Anointed Creations Kitchen, where we are known for our chicken on the sticks and funnel cakes, but we will soon be known for our pizzas because we're about to start doing pizza, but and Blended and Victorious is our baby, where we teach other families how to blend their family God's way, because the enemy is after families, so that's our heart, to help others build a godly family that can withstand the test of time.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so thank you, ladies, so much once again. Everybody, if you're watching this now or later, please make sure you look them up on social media. Follow, like, and share me. Follow, like, and share all of us here today to keep up with what we're doing. And if we will be coming back for a part 2, which I think is very needed. But other than that, thank you so much for tuning in. You guys have a blessed day, and keep an eye out for me, not next Saturday, but the Saturday after that at 12 p.m. for my show, Outside the Box, where we'll be discussing divorce, which I think is another important topic that is not discussed enough in the Christian community. A lot of stigma there, but we'll talk about that in 2 weeks. All right. Thank you so much again. And you guys be blessed. And again, thank you, ladies, for doing this. Everybody be blessed. Bye.
Thank you.